Okay, hello students, I'm Geethanjali and today we'll start the chapter Living World and cover till the binomial nomenclature. So what basically is living? We need to first see few characteristics to understand what is living. So first the thing that comes to our mind is growth. So what is basically growth? Growth can simply mean increase in the number of cells or increase in the mass or increase even in the number of individuals in case of bacterial colonies or something like that, in case of single cell organisms, right? So usually in multicellular organisms, the growth is defined by the increase in the number of cells, that is by cell division. Whenever the cell division, there is definitely growth happening. When we talk about unicellular organisms, when the cell basically divides, there are two things that are simultaneously happening, or we can, like, the same phenomena is given to us like two sort of, it has two purposes. One is to actually grow, that is growth. We call this as growth, and we also call this as reproduction, right? So in single cell organisms where asexual reproduction is very prevalent, growth and reproduction are what? These are mutually inclusive events. Means they both somehow refer to the same sort of phenomena, right? So basically this uh, cell is dividing, it's serving two purposes. First, it's bacterial colony, or it's it's, suppose it's a bacteria, so its bacterial colony is growing, and also it is reproducing. So it serves two purposes. The same activity of this organism is serving two purposes. That's why it's, these two events are mutually inclusive events. Whereas in higher organisms and plants, where sexual reproduction is prevalent, that means two parents and no fusion of gametes actually. Here there's no fusion of gametes in asexual, and here there's fusion. In such organisms, these are mutually exclusive. What are mutually exclusive? Growth and reproduction, right? Growth and reproduction are mutually exclusive. That means they refer to different things, right? When an organism, when your parents give birth to you, obviously it doesn't mean they're growing, right? We just refer to as reproduction. We don't refer to it as growth. Growth is different thing in multicellular organisms. Reproduction and growth are different things in higher multicellular organisms. And also, growth is not a defining feature. Why is growth not defining feature? Because growth can be both physical and it can be internal, right? So physical growth is not a defining feature, right? Because even in that case, even mountains can grow, even what non-living things can grow just by increasing its the number of particles at its surface. So that is why growth is not a defining feature. What about reproduction? We just now spoke about reproduction, right? So reproduction is also not a defining feature. Why is it not a defining feature? Let us take example of sterile human beings, sterile humans, right? Some humans are sterile; they're not able to reproduce because of some problem they have in their reproductive system. Or let us take mules. These are hybrid animals that cannot reproduce, and also worker bees. Let us say all these cannot reproduce. But can we say they are non-living? Can we call them non-living? No, right? So we can't call them non-living because they do live, but they are not able to reproduce. So that's why even reproduction is not a defining feature. So we cannot call this as defining feature. Now let's go to metabolism. Metabolism is what is metabolism? NCERT defines metabolism as the sum total of all chemical reactions in our body that occur in our body, right? So when we talk about the metabolic reactions that take place outside the body, we can replicate these in test tubes, right? In such cases, such reactions are called living reactions. So we are calling these reactions as living. We are telling that these are alive, these reactions are living. So even if it's taking in vitro or in vivo, in vivo is inside the body, in vitro is outside. So even in these two cases, metabolism is always living. It's always living, right? So whenever an entity exhibits metabolism, we can surely say that it is living. That is why we call this a defining feature of the organisms, right? And this defining feature, usually metabolism takes place in cells, right? It takes place in cellular aggregates or cellular organizations. So we can also say that cellular organization, okay, which is literally beaming with metabolism, cellular organization is also defining feature of living things, right? Now next is consciousness. So there are two things, consciousness and self-consciousness. So consciousness basically means awareness, right? Being aware of anything is called consciousness. So when we're aware of our surroundings, we say that we are conscious, and when we are not aware, we are unconscious. So human beings have a special ability, okay? They have something called self-consciousness. Now, self-consciousness means we are able to be aware of ourselves. We know that, oh, I am something. You are aware of yourself, that you are some sort of entity, like you do things, so you're aware of that. But insects and other things, they're usually not aware that they exist. They're just aware of their surroundings, right? So how do we know that a thing is aware, and how can we say that consciousness is a defining feature? See, whenever there is a change in the surrounding, we call it a stimuli, right? And to this stimuli, the organisms respond. So this is basically an evidence that the organisms are conscious. So hence we can say that consciousness is also a defining feature. This is also a defining feature of organisms. In fact, consciousness, you have to also remember that this is a very complicated feature of a human being, because we still are not fully aware of what is how consciousness arises in an organism and all that. Anyways, we know that when human being is in coma, he basically loses self-consciousness, but he's definitely conscious of his surrounding, but he's not aware of himself, right? So self-conscious is not a defining property, but consciousness is definitely a defining property.